Hello, I'm Chris Moon, a fellow artist manager, and I will be your guide through tough love, adventures in artist management. Today we chat with Erin Anderson, founder of Olivia Artist Management. Erin's commitment to emerging artists and her thoughtfulness in all the work that she does is truly inspiring. I've known Erin for a while now, and while we've had the pleasure of working together on several occasions, I didn't really know much about her backstory. While so many of us stumble into artist management, she actively tried to steer clear of it. But ultimately, the calling and pull was just too much. And I'm sure her artists are very grateful that she decided to stick it out. One of the reasons I wanted to start this podcast was to learn from my peers, not just tips and tricks, but who they are and how they frame their work. This episode embodies that for me. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin Anderson, and my company is called Olivia Management. We've been managing artists for 7.5 years now, which is crazy. Time flies. We work mostly in the Americana and folk music space. We've got some bordering on rock and roll and some bordering on country, but we're in that genre for the most part. So we work with artists like Smoothhound Smith and Jill Andrews, and Jill Andrews started a band called the Hush Kids. I'm really into harmonies, so any bands with beautiful harmonies are my jam. We also work with like a rock artist named Matthew Mayfield. We work with an artist more on the Americana leaning countryside named Ruthie Collins. We work with a longtime songwriter, brilliant guy named Derek Webb, and we work with this beautiful songwriter named Lydia Luce, and she plays viola and violin, and she plays strings, and so we've kind of got that piece of it as well. So we run the gamut in that kind of folk Americana world.
No, that's great. And I'll have to say, you know, while you and I have had an opportunity to work together in certain capacities in the past, I've always admired all the artists you've worked with. And it's kind of, you almost set like a tastemaker component to it. Like anything that kind of falls under your umbrella is always worth a listen, in my opinion.
Thank you. I try. I think there are some managers that can work with stuff they don't personally love. Like, I think they're just good managers and good salespeople. But I feel like I wear my emotions on my face. And so if I don't just love the music, I can't represent it. You know, I have to really, really believe in it. So that's a big part of what we've tried to build here. So thank you. Yeah,
no, it definitely, I operate the same way. That's always been my kind of barometer in some respects for, if I'm going to engage in the artist management side of things. It's like, is this waking me up at 3:00 in the morning with, an idea? And,
yes.
and am I going to be, right down front center to take in a set? Or am I going to be, is it going to make my day when I see a demo come into my inbox, that kind of thing,
right. Yes. That's my favorite. And some of my artists try to say, well, I'll send it to you when it's polished. And I'm just like, no, I love the music. Just send me the cell phone demo. I just want to hear it. So yes, I totally get that.
Yeah. So how involved do you get to have a tendency to get? I know it's probably different artist to artist. Although the more I speak to various managers, it is kind of interesting to see the consistency in some respects. But how involved do you tend to get in that creative process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think different managers probably, like you said, have different philosophies and different strengths. I'm just a fan, and I don't feel like I have any sort of special qualification to try to tell an artist a song needs to be shorter or it needs a better bridge or a better chorus. So I don't get particularly involved in that creative process. The way I describe it to my clients is I'm good at being creative about business and being creative about finding you new revenue streams and figuring out new ways to grow your brand. But what's important to me is that the artist believes it. And so I say a lot to my artists, like, if you're coming to me and saying like, what's cool right now and what's the radio going to play, I think you're asking the wrong question. I think the artists that really break through and make an impact are the ones that say, this is what I have to say to the world. This is what I feel like I need to put out there into the world. And this is what I'm feeling right now. And this is the beauty in the art I want to create. And so I actually really push my artists to go with their guts and their hearts about it and figure out what they think is what they want to put out into the world. And then I get really creative about selling it. So I think the most that I get involved is just like, I'll help with track order, because I think you don't want a super fast song next to a super slow song, and you want to think through that. So I'll share my thoughts on that. And sometimes I'll share my thoughts on, our artist Jill Andrews made a record last year, and she had 20 plus songs written for it. And so she came in one day, and actually with all of our interns and all the employees, she played all of them for us, and we all voted on, hey, if you can only put 12 on an album, which are the 12 strongest that speak to people. So I'll definitely share my thoughts in that realm, but I don't get involved in like the super nitty-gritty creative piece of it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So you're coming at it from, the level of a fan, just being there first and having the ability to give some counsel and think about, sequencing, like you mentioned, and things of that nature. But what I love what you touched on is the fact that where you do get creative is on the business side of things, the marketing side, which I've always found, I don't know, there is definitely the kind of this pure execution component of being an artist manager, the not necessarily fun thing of, answering emails, following up advancing shows, booking flights, the logistics, right? That just have to be done. But then there's moments where you get an opportunity to be creative on the marketing side, where you think about collaborations potentially, or, opening opportunities or whatever. I mean, it can kind of come in different packages and in different ways, but I always, those are the moments, at least for me, when I'm working with an artist, where I'm like, oh, now this is where I get to kind of stretch some creative muscles and maybe speak into something that I wouldn't necessarily have an opportunity to do otherwise. It might, frame things for an artist that can have sometimes a profound, opportunity or change, potentially. I love that we as artist managers get an opportunity to do that from time to time.
Yes, me too. It's my favorite part.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. So what was your path into being an artist manager? Because everybody kind of comes, and for the most part, most people just don't raise their hand and go, I'm going to be an artist manager. Most people kind of have some industry experience or come at it from a different, through a different path. So I always love hearing everybody's individual path.
Well, the funny thing about my path is I actively fought against being a manager for the first 6 or 7 years of my career. I managed, quote unquote, a friend in college that was a musician, and he was very talented. And my experience of doing that was I would work really hard, and I would book a gig, or I would promote it, or I would hang the posters and do kind of all the nitty gritty work. And then there was one time that was kind of the last straw for me, where he just was like, I don't really feel like doing that, and just straight up didn't show up to a show I had booked and promoted and,
oh my gosh,
worked so hard. And I had this moment, I was like 22, like never again. I'm not going to let my success and my hard work go to waste for someone else. And so I thought, well, I want to avoid being a manager, because that's what it is. You're tying your success and your career in alongside with an artist. And so my first job out of college was at UMG, Universal Music Group, and I worked in what they call their shared services department. And at the time, Universal in Nashville was MCA Records, Mercury Records, and Lost Highway Records. So MCA and Mercury were their country staples, and so when I was there, they had Sugarland, and they had George Strait, and they had Reba McEntire, and I got to work on some really cool, big kind of legacy country stuff. But then we also had Lost Highway Records, which was putting out Elvis Costello and Lucinda Williams, and we did a Van Morrison record, and that was the stuff that I personally was a big fan of. And I had this great job where I worked for the general manager of the label. And so he was kind of the general manager, CFO, and he said, I want an assistant, but I want an assistant to do spreadsheets and look at artist contracts and help me be better at my job. I don't need someone to get me coffee and get me lunch and do my, get my laundry. And so I had this great training where I just got to see the profit and loss statements for all of these major records. And I got to see and overhear contract negotiation with like Reba McEntire. And I just got this really great high level education on the label side of this is how labels operate. And it was also cool because it was a major label, but the Lost Highway imprint of the label was essentially operating as a mini indie label. So I kind of got to see both sides of that, which was awesome. And I got to feeling like I want to be as educated as possible in business. So I actually went back to school and I got my MBA at Vanderbilt And I did a concentration in strategy and marketing and entrepreneurship. Vanderbilt doesn't have like a specialized music business program. So I was in classes with like one of my classmates is the brand manager for Oscar Mayer Wiener. Now he like runs the Wienermobile program.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I just like had this great education. Like some of my classmates are on Wall Street now and doing all these really big things in business. And I thought, well, the music industry is in a flux. This is like 2007, 8. I want to be a part of the solution. And so I want to be a smart person in business. And so out of Owen at Vanderbilt, I got recruited to Amazon Music. And so I ended up moving to Seattle and working for Amazon Music. So I started on the label side, then got a better education, and then I went to the retail side. And so I was working for, the best internet retailer in the world. And they had just started the MP3 store 3 or 4 years before I got there. And so it was still a growing piece of their business. And so I got to kind of be a part of building that music team at Amazon. I moved to Seattle for a couple years, and I did some artist relations, and I did some programs where I was working very closely with artist managers and artists to figure out how do we market your record within Amazon. So I would spend a lot of time talking to managers and artists and say, okay, we want to partner with you, and we want to make sure that your records are being surfaced to people coming to shop on Amazon and they're seeing what's there. So I got this, label background and then this retail background, and I became increasingly more unhappy at Amazon because I'm just not built to have 9 bosses. I'm not built to be a company man. And so there were a couple projects I had worked really hard on, and Amazon, being a company with a multi-billion-dollar operating budget, they could change their mind on projects, and even projects they had put, a couple $100,000 into, they could say, well, we don't think this is growing fast enough for the return we want, so we're going to shut this down. And so I was there for 2 years, and 3 major projects got shut down,
wow.
while I was there. And so as someone with an entrepreneurial spirit, every time I felt like, oh, you just killed my baby. Like, you just killed this thing that I invested in.
Right.
And also it wasn't because they were failing. It was because they weren't succeeding fast enough. And so that was also really hard for me to swallow. Like, this thing is making money. This thing is driving traffic. It's just not enough, and it's not fast enough. And probably that mindset is why Amazon is the company that it is today. But I very quickly realized it was not for me. So luckily, around the time I'm having this realization, like, I can't stay at Amazon any longer, some friends of mine from Nashville were on tour in Seattle and asked if they could sleep on my couch. And I went to the show, and it was like the first time I felt excited about the music industry, and kind of like you were saying, where we like sat up all night dreaming about how to grow their band. And I just got really excited. And the lead singer of that band kind of jokingly looked at me and was like, well, do you want to like move back to Nashville and manage us? And I was like, yeah, I do. That's exactly what I want to do. And he was kind of taken aback and surprised that that was my response. But it kind of just hit me in that moment that I had been avoiding management because I didn't want to tie my career to someone who wasn't working hard. And here was a band who had self-booked themselves across the country, and they played to a pretty packed room in Seattle. They had self-promoted. They had nobody helping them. These guys weren't going to not show up for a show. They were so excited to have anybody else thinking about their career and helping them. I realized that I had been kind of fighting against my strength, which is I like running things, for lack of a better way to say it. I like being in charge, and what was really hard for me at Amazon was I had no control over how fast projects were accomplished and if they ever saw the light of day. And so it got me really excited that I could manage this band, and the lead singer and I could put our heads together, and we could launch something tomorrow if we wanted. And we wouldn't have to wait for permission, and we wouldn't have to go through 7 levels of people understanding something. We could just be agile and excited and do this together. So I quit my job. I think the story has become like folklore now for me. And so in my mind, I like marched into my boss's office the next day and quit. I'm sure it wasn't literally the next day, but within a month I quit and moved back to Nashville and started an artist management company.
Wow.
And that was 7.5 years ago. Yeah.
Wow, that's a great story and a great journey.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you what was the moment when you realized, oh, I'm doing this. I'm an artist manager.
Yeah.
But you kind of turned it on its head, where it's like, no, I'm not doing this. But yeah, now is the time. And the relationships are so intimate and so
Right.
unique, I think, for everyone. It's funny, I've been managing for 20 plus years, and I start, when I start thinking about this, even just recently, I've gotten to the place where I think, the root in all this is like that moment of trust. Like the story you just shared, there was a moment where you're like, I'm going to trust my time and talents to articulate and really push forward this artist in their career, and vice versa, where somebody's like, well, I'm going to also trust you with our art and what we're doing, to kind of play that role. And that, in some respects, I mean, that's almost true of any relationship, but when you get to that moment where you can go, hey, we trust each other and we're going to figure this out and we're going to commit to it, that's the kind of seed to the relationship that, I find it really hard to sometimes articulate what the role of an artist manager is. Right. And I'd love to hear your definition of it. But I feel like through these conversations, I'm starting to kind of unravel, certain elements of it along the way. But I guess it's still relevant in some respects. I mean, once you moved back and started your company, I mean, obviously you're doubling down on doing artist management. You kind of avoided it at all cost up until that point. Right. But were you able to, kind of take all these various experiences, obviously the catalyst coming out of Amazon, but then all that history you had at Universal and being around Lost Highway, and kind of bake that into, where you're at and where you wanted to go with, starting your own company and the type of artists you wanted to work with?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you were asking like when was the moment I knew I was a manager, and I remember I think there was just this very clear break in like, okay, I quit my job at Amazon, I packed everything, and I moved back across the country back to Nashville. And I think I moved back on a Friday, and I think it was Easter weekend, so I like saw some friends, went to an Easter barbecue, and then Monday morning I remember waking up and being like, what do I do now? Like this is my job now. And I remember taking my laptop and driving over to the lead singer's house and sitting on his couch and being like, is this it? Like, are we doing this now? Is this my job now? So I have a very distinct memory of that very first Monday morning of being like, oh, this is what I do, and starting to email people and introduce myself as an artist manager, which is a weird, description to suddenly be giving. But what I did in that first few weeks was I just emailed everyone I still had a relationship with in Nashville and said, hey, I'm starting this artist management company. I don't know what I'm doing. I never interned for a manager. I'm not even really sure what my job is, but what I know is I understand business. I understand entrepreneurship. I understand the digital landscape of music currently. And I believe in this band, and I want to help them make money and make art and survive making art. And so that was kind of the foundation I started from. And I had all these great, relationships and friends that went to lunch with me, went to coffee with me. And I remember one of the questions I asked everyone was, tell me what are like your 3 biggest mistakes or regrets that you have. Like if you are talking to a brand new manager, what would your advice to me be? Like, what at all costs avoid these things. And then what are the 3 best things you did for yourself setting up your company and setting yourself up as a manager? And so I got to poll a bunch of people in the industry about that. And it kind of gave me a great foundation of understanding what my job was and how to try to do it well. But then, of course, there are always those lessons you have to learn. No matter how many times people tell you, you still bang your head against the wall and learn them the hard way yourself anyways. But that was kind of my first few weeks of doing it, was just polling people and asking that.
No, that's great. And now, of course, you realize I have, I'd love for you to answer those questions.
Yeah.
For us here, you've opened a door.
Sure. So this is the one that I laugh about because I wish I had listened, but I don't think you can understand it until you experience it, which is one of my friends who was my classmate. And so she had gone straight into management. And so the years that I was at Universal and grad school and at Amazon, she had been managing that whole time. So she had been promoted and had some clients of her own. And her first piece of advice to me was, you have to figure out how to have boundaries with your clients, because as you were saying, Chris, like it's a trust relationship, and it's a strange relationship. And she was at a point in her life where her clients had become her friends, but they had become her world. And so they traveled together, and they had barbecues on the weekends, and they went out for drinks, and they had meals, and she felt like she could never stop working because they were her social circle as well.
Right.
And so one of her big pieces of advice for me was, work with people that are good people that you care about, but figure out how to have boundaries so that you can have work-life balance, so that you can shut your computer when you need to. And obviously some nights I work until midnight, but some nights I'm like, hey, it's 6 p.m. I need to go have a life and see my family and, go to the gym or take a walk in nature or let my dogs out. And she felt like she had never drawn those clear boundaries with her clients. And I thought when she said that, she was crazy. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I thought I was being a good manager if I was available 24/7 for anything an artist needed. And I burnt out so quickly, and I started to resent some of my clients because it took me a very long time to learn how to draw that line. And I wanted so badly for my career to take off and my company to succeed and my artists to succeed that I just never stopped working. And it took me a long time to understand that wasn't sustainable, and it led to resentfulness in those relationships. And so I wish I had listened to her advice, but I think that's one you have to experience to understand it.
No,
how important those boundaries are.
Right. I can completely relate, because in my early part of my career, like so many people, I mean, when you start out doing management, when you're trying to develop an artist, there's not a lot of revenue sometimes to kind of attach to.
Totally.
So, I always had a side hustle or a real job. So I would go and work that real job for 8 hours a day, and I'd book into doing management work. And I give my wife complete credit for this, for pulling me out of that and giving me a life, because I would, we'd wrap up work at like 10 or 11 at night, and she'd be like, you want to go have a drink? And I'd be like, no, I got to go home and work. And I don't think she believed me until we started, dating. And she was like, oh my God, you work all the time. And I'm like, yeah, I really do. This is kind of what I do. But I realized pretty quickly when I started being distracted from that and getting away from it, that I was actually doing better work, and I was more focused, and I wasn't as burnt out, to your point. And yeah, you're right. I think that's a lesson that it's good to heed, is good to take in, but is almost impossible to necessarily adhere to until you've gone through it.
Right. Yeah.
That's a challenging one. What was a bit of advice that you heard that you were able to kind of take to heart and kind of implement without having to necessarily go through the process yourself in so many ways?
I think that's a great question. And now I'm trying to remember 7 years ago what some people told me. I think, this piece of advice, I probably didn't need someone to tell me, but I'm glad they reiterate it, is that the industry is so small, and Nashville is such a small city, but even so, like Chris, you don't live here, but we have so many friends in common and clients in common. And
right.
Just to always treat people well and to always be kind. And it's a hard industry, and you're going to get rejected, and you're going to get no's, and people are going to do things you don't agree with. And you're going to have, jealousy bubble up inside of you because you don't understand why this artist is getting this opportunity when your artist makes more sense for it, or earned it, or whatever. But that understanding that I think you could probably get far in this industry and be a jerk and be a shark and go poach a bunch of clients and treat people poorly. But I think at some point that catches up to you. And so it's been really, I think, beneficial to me in my career. And it's something I'm really proud of, that I try really hard to be kind and helpful. And even when I'm frustrated, even when I think someone has done something incorrect, and that's not to say I certainly won't fight for my artists and what I think they deserve and what I think the contract says, but it means I'm going to fight fair, and I'm going to be kind, and I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to be trustworthy. And I think just that, like, someone reiterated to me, like, it is a small town. So do your best to always treat people with kindness. And even when you part ways with clients, like leaving on a really great note and making sure that you set them up for success in the future. And even if you're angry or you're hurt, doing your best to hand things over and kind of end things gracefully and with class, because you never know when it's going to come back around, and you never know when you're going to have an opportunity to work together again, or be in the same place, or be in a position to for that person to help you. And if you handled it well and you handled it with class and grace and kindness, that's just going to serve you into the future.
No, that's great advice. And that's the other thing too. I know I had a hard time wrapping my head around early in my career, and not sorry, I'm kind of jumping ahead into what I'm about to say. Not that I wasn't, didn't adhere to that philosophy, because that's just kind of the nature of who I am. I like to try to tackle that in that manner. Although, like anyone, when you get pushed against a wall a little bit, it's hard not to bite back. But what I really struggled with is the idea that these type of relationships have a tendency to come to an end at some point. It's very rare for them to go on for forever, indefinitely. And that's a really hard thing. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, in a sense that, you kind of have a tendency, or a lot of people have a tendency to kind of create these relationships where you're emotionally invested, in the process. So when that relationship is, comes to an end for whatever reason, there's a variety of reasons why it can. It's hard sometimes to divorce yourself from the emotional capacity of it, and accept the fact that, these things don't go on forever. I mean, the person that got me into doing artist management and, put their faith and trust in me early on, eventually that relationship ran its course, and we had a 17-year run, which is like a lifetime in this industry.
Sure.
But the beauty of that is, on the other side of that, we actually were able to connect and have what I consider, a much stronger relationship on the friend level than we did when we were working together. And we appreciate and support each other in a different kind of way. And, there is kind of a flip side to that. But that's a hard lesson, to kind of learn until you go through that process. But I've been down that road, actually in the middle of going down that road right now. I just recently resigned from an artist I was working with. Yeah. And it's such an emotional and draining experience, but it is part of, the life cycle, if you will, of this type of relationship.
Yes. And I had that, I had a really interesting experience. I had a client leave. I always understood that there were times that it didn't work out, and there were times that we weren't a good fit, or we weren't great communicators, or we weren't doing a good job, or I wasn't able to be effective for an artist. I always understood the relationship ending then. I think the bigger shock I've had in the past few years is when it was going well, and I was making the artist a lot of money, and I felt like we grew them, and we had a great relationship, and it was going really well. And what I naively wasn't prepared for is when that happens, and an artist is suddenly worth, $1 million, a lot of other people kind of perk up and start looking at that artist and swimming around and making an offer. And so we had an artist leave, and I was very surprised and very blindsided by it, to be honest. And but the beauty of that was that it was kind of a couple months before the holidays, and so I was able to just take the time of the holidays and the time away and the slow month in the industry in December and really analyze, do I want to keep doing this? Do I want to keep investing in artists when that, what you're saying is, it's absolutely a reality. They're all eventually going to leave. All of the relationships are going to end eventually. And as someone who has a really hard time separating, the personal from the business, and as someone whose heart is really invested in it, am I prepared to set myself up for a life of that? And it was a really beautiful time kind of exploring that and starting to think about, well, what if I went back on the music tech side? And what if I, tried something else? And to come to the conclusion that, I think artist management is so fun and so beautiful, and something I'm supposed to be doing with my life. I'm just going to have to get to a point where I'm okay with every couple years my heart's going to get broken. And as long as I can keep my head up and say, the relationship ran its course, and onward and upward, I can keep doing this. And so it was a very, it was a beautiful experience, and something I'm really thankful for, to be able to kind of hold this up to the light and say, is this something I really want to do? And then to come back and say, yep, it absolutely is. And so, the next time that kind of thing happens, to just already know going into that this is still what I want to be doing and what I'm supposed to be doing, and there's beauty in it, even though it hurts sometimes and it's hard sometimes.
Yeah, no, that's amazing to be in tune, to be able to be in tune with yourself enough to kind of realize the ups and downs of that and still commit to it. That's a brave thing to do.
Yeah. Well, my father's an entrepreneur, and he's worked in real estate and he's worked in retail and he's had a bunch of different companies. And I remember calling him, kind of walking through that, and he laughed and he said, "You think if you just switched to a different industry, you'd never get your heart broken? Like you'd never lose a big deal or have something fall through?" Like he just said, when you're someone like you are, honey, like your heart is always going to be tied up in it. So it doesn't really get easier if you switch industries, which I thought was a wise thing to say.
Yeah, no, that is, and that kind of parallels what I've realized and I think it probably overlaps with the artists you've worked with too. It's not, it's a job on a certain level. The job
Right.
as an artist manager is a job. The job as an or the role of an artist is a job when you do it professionally. But all the people I've worked with, it's not like they're going to stop creating art. Right. That's one of the kind of I guess benchmarks when I'm looking and thinking about who I want to work with or invest my time and energy in on the management side or even the consultant side is this person going to walk out of this room and still create art regardless, of the commercial viability of it or whatever? It's just what they're meant to do in the same manner that, like you were describing, this is what you're meant to do and this is where your focal point is at. And, there's ups and downs that go along with that that you just can't really get around. What are some of the other kind of benchmarks for you in deciding to engage and take on an artist?
Yeah. So like we talked about, I have to love the music. I have to just really like them as people, because as you know, like you're inevitably going to be stuck on a plane together or have to travel together, and you're tying your lives and your calendars and your finances together. So just I try to spend some time with them and really get to know who they are as people and how they operate. And I like to share just a moral ground with my artists. I don't think we have to all share the same religious beliefs, but I think we have to believe in treating people well. And I learned that lesson from signing an artist that did not treat people well. And I realized very quickly I didn't want my name and my brand and my company to be associated with that. So I'm looking for people that feel the same way about how we should operate in the world. I think that's really important. Because I'm a small boutique management company with 3 employees and a handful of interns and an office and some overhead, I need to find artists that already have some income coming in. I know there are managers that are great at working with baby bands and know how to take an artist from 0 to 10,000 fans. I prefer to operate in that like 10,000 to 100,000 fan world where there's already some people there, and I can help you get creative and entrepreneurial about extracting value there and finding new revenue streams and figuring out new ways to engage super fans. That's kind of the place I think that my strengths lie. So I look for artists that already have some level of income and some level of fan base. And then the last piece of it for me is I look for, when I'm sitting in the meeting with the artist, are my wheels turning in my head? Am I already thinking about what are the first 200 things I would do to grow this artist? And so it's kind of like there's kind of the unknown quality of, am I excited about this? One of the more recent artists we signed was Matthew Mayfield, and he had just put a record out, but he has these 2 videos that he had done, music videos that were just beautiful and cinematic, and he showed them to me in the meeting, and I just got so excited about all the different things we could do with them and how we could use them. And that like kind of unknown piece that's what do I think I can help this artist accomplish, and do I get excited about it from the moment I meet them, and do I stay up all night dreaming about what I could do for them and how I could help them and how we could be a team to grow this. Those are the artists that I get really excited about and I think are a good fit. And then obviously are in that genre, in that wheelhouse that we feel confident operating in.
No, that's it's great to have that perspective and understanding of what works,
Right.
what resonates for you, that you can have that vision, but also, kind of fits not necessarily squarely into place, but at least within, some parameters that, you can kind of run with. It's that can be a challenging thing to figure out as you go, but as you go, you get a better feel for that as you kind of go along, and that probably also draws people, I would imagine, into your world as you kind of build your brand, if you will.
Yeah, I hope so. I feel like a lot of times when people are reaching out, they say, I saw what you did for X artist. I'd be interested in talking about working with you, because they're watching, how we're helping people get creative about growing.
Right. And the work is always what speaks best, in those moments.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, what are some of your favorite memories or moments, in the past, 7 or so years as you kind of ramped up, that have kind of been defining moments for you as an artist manager, that not only reinforce why you do this, but just, are kind of tent poles of, oh, this is why I get up every day, and this is what, the role I know I can play.
Yeah. Well, I always love, we have access to all of our artist socials, so I can see fans reaching out and saying, your music got me through a hard time, your music helped me through a breakup, or your music saved me and I was depressed and thinking about killing myself and you gave me hope, and those kinds of things. Like, I love reading that. It like you said, it makes me feel like this is why we do this. There's a couple moments that come to mind when you say that. First, we had an artist that was nominated for a Grammy 2 years ago. And it was, the Grammy process is awesome. There's all these different pieces and you submit. And I remember when we went to go vote, there were something like 180 different artists in this category, and they end up with 5 nominees. So, and of the 180 artists in the category, I had heard of and had been to shows and was a fan of 100 of them. So while I thought my artist, belonged in that category, there was no semblance of like, this is a shoo-in, because it was just it's such a great, Americana folk music is just such a beautiful genre, and there's so much art happening right now that we didn't have any inkling of, is it even possible this artist is going to get nominated? And I had actually been traveling. They did the nomination announcement right after Thanksgiving. And so I had gone to Iceland for Thanksgiving. So I was like I was still messed up, jet lagged, and I didn't know what time it was, and I didn't know what day it was. And my artist was calling me at like 7:30 in the morning, and I thought, oh my gosh, something's wrong. And I answered, and she was just squealing, just high pitched. And in that moment, I just put it all together, like, it's Grammy announcement day. Oh my gosh, it's 8:30 Eastern. So that means they already announced it on the East Coast, and it kind of all came rushing back. And it was a definite moment of, oh my gosh, we built something that people liked and took note of. And it felt very like, okay, we've done something. It felt very validating that happened. It was a beautiful record, and we had worked really hard. We helped them raise a chunk of money to make the record. We helped them negotiate with the producer. We helped them get the record made. We helped them, shop the record and get a record deal. We found them a new agent. It was fun because we were there from, when the songs were being written until the record came out. And so I felt like it very much was something my company and myself had a lot to do with. And so that was a very just validating, special, exciting moment. That was a really good one. There's another moment that always comes to me, and I remember this on my bad days, but that very first artist I was managing, I had quit my big fancy Amazon job, and I had moved back to Nashville, and I was taking on, like you were saying, I was taking on all these part-time gigs to make ends meet, because 15% of an indie rock band's income is not even enough to pay your car payment. And so I was just juggling a bunch, and the band was putting out some music, and I remember Paste Magazine wanted to premiere the song, and the level of joy I had probably equaled the level of joy I had 5 years later when we had a Grammy nomination. Just that feeling of like, we're doing it, like somebody else that is a gatekeeper is validating that this band is good and worthy of coverage. And I remember calling the band and we were all jumping up and down like, okay, a real magazine we've heard of is going to write about this. And so that moment always sticks out to me when I'm having a rough day and feeling like I'm not getting enough yeses. I think about, man, Erin, there was a day where one premiere made your month because somebody, agreed. Let's step back and put it all in perspective and say, okay, there are 8 artists your company works with now, and premieres are happening every other week now, and tours are being announced all the time, and cool things are happening. So that moment of like, okay, I'm actually doing this. Somebody likes this, and this is legit now. That was a really fun moment too.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I quite often, I remember the first time hearing an artist I was working with a song on the radio, not even in the hometown. Like we were driving into New York to play a show, and it came on and it was like, oh my gosh, wow, And I actually had a moment when back in the day, Tower Records, I would go, get off work, and they were open till midnight. So I'd go and like basically read magazines until they closed for a couple hours. And I remember reading, flipping through like Uncut or Mojo or something. And they play music constantly, and something came on. I was like, for a split second, I was like, wow, this is really, really good. Oh shit, this is, so-and-so, this is who I work with. It was a record. It would be, it was a few years old, hadn't listened to it in a while, but I had a moment where I could appreciate it outside of myself, if you will, or the history I had with it, and kind of listen to it from a different perspective. And I that's one I have a tendency to go back to and say, I know, everybody loves validation, and everybody loves those opportunities. I've had, thankfully, a lot of those over the course of my career, and that you use those as fuel. And you also use it as a way to kind of going back to what we were talking about earlier, like how do you explain what you do? Well, having an artist nominated for a Grammy, makes the parents in the non-music industry, friends and family kind of understand, it's a validation,
right?
In a way.
Although my mom walked around telling people that my artist was nominated for an Emmy, because she didn't know what that was.
That's
so
hilarious.
I just learned to say, yes, they are. They're nominated for an Emmy.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
That's really funny. I was talking to a good friend of mine who had an artist on SNL several years ago, but he was like, I brought my parents to SNL, and that's when they finally realized I'm going to have a career at this. This is okay. And I was like,
that's awesome.
Yeah, I was like, you can't get much better than that in a lot of ways. But
yeah, that's the dream. That's on every vision board of mine. That would be the cool.
Yeah, no doubt. So I mean, having those kind of things are really special. But I also think having those kind of personal moments, like you mentioned with Paste. Funny enough, with Paste, I had a situation early in my career where I was managing Josh Rouse, and they were, thankfully, as they launched, were big fans of Josh. But I got turned on to an artist in many ways that they featured. That I ended up working with, Rosie Thomas, because Rosie, I think, in her first year was their top artist of the year, and Josh was like number 3. And at that point, cool. Looking at that, I remember reaching out and just saying, thank you for the support, thank you for noticing what we're doing. And, I also want to reciprocate and say, in Pace's situation, I mean, Josh and I were both big fans and really appreciated the work they were doing. An artist's behalf, and that began a very long and fruitful relationship with Paste over the years. Not even necessarily on just the artist manager side, but just as a friendship, and crossing different paths, and that kind of circles back around to what you were saying earlier, as far as it being a small industry and trying to be good to everybody. I was really humbled when I was working with one of the co-founders in another capacity. On a totally different project years ago. We're actually down South by Southwest, and I just finished doing we used to do a series of day parties down there, which we booked one of your artists 4 years ago. And so anyway, you go back at the end of the day and just kind of chill out for a bit and try to decompress. But this friend of mine actually pulled up an old email that I'd sent them like 10 years ago. And he was just, it was a moment for him too, where he was like, oh my God, an artist manager and an artist reached out and paid attention to what we were doing and reciprocated it. And you forget about the power of those kind of things in everyone's lives. But I mean, it's like, this industry is harsh, and it's hard. Yeah. It's hard for artists, and it's hard for the people that try to support artists on both sides of the fence, so it's like we got to lift each other up and try to provide those kind of opportunities when we can, because it really does fuel everybody's desire to do their best work and to accentuate
Right.
and shine a light on, artists and their best work.
Yeah. And I also feel like treating people like humans, like, and keeping in mind that, yeah, our job as a manager is hard. Their job as a publication is hard. They're trying to make money and get eyeballs, and they're doing the best they can. And we're doing the best we can. And so I think sometimes just to have that moment where you just step back and say, I don't need anything from you. I'm just checking in to say, hope you're well. This cool thing you just did was awesome. I'm glad you did it. That I think goes really, really far. Just treating people like humans and recognizing that everyone's working really hard.
Right. If you can remove the, emotive and do that with a level of purity, it can be really powerful. And, you never know. Like, removing that motive and creating a connection can, at some point, without you even knowing it at the time, can, plant a seed that can, grow into something at a different time.
Yep, absolutely.
And I think that's some of the best work that I think anyone can do, but certainly artists and their managers, kind of taking that philosophy is an important step.
My favorite story echoing that recently in my life, there was a friend of a friend. He was a drummer in like an emo band. And 6 years ago, he emailed me and said, hey, we have this mutual friend. I just wanted to know if we could go to coffee and I could ask some advice because I feel like this contract isn't fair. And I said, well, I'm not a lawyer, but I look at a lot of these. Happy to go to coffee with you and just tell you my opinion on it. And I didn't really talk to him much after that. Like, we follow each other on the internet, but I didn't really know what he was doing. And 3 months ago, he called me and said, you might not remember me, but I'm this drummer. And I said, of course I do. How are you? And he said, well, I've quit the band and I'm head of A&R, or not head, but I do A&R at Curb Records now. And I have this artist that I think you should meet. And I told her that you're one of my favorite people in the music industry because you helped me. And she's Americana artist. And I told her that I think, you're the person she needs to talk to. And I just like had that moment where I was like, this was like a drummer that couldn't, I thought at the time, could never help me. But I'm going to take 5 minutes and help him just because we have this great mutual friend and I want artists to be treated well. And fast forward 6 years and he introduced me to one of my more recent clients who is just a perfect fit for me. Because who would have ever thought that this drummer of this emo band would end up in A&R at a pretty big record label? And of course I didn't do it for that, but just that picture of that happens all the time. And it's a really fun and beautiful thing when it does.
It is. It is. So is. And, it just goes back to, trying to do good by everyone, without, a motive, and being patient, and being open and knowing that those seeds you plant, even when you don't do it directly, is more of an indirect thing, just being kind to somebody and helping and assisting, those things kind of get lodged in people's minds. The same day this week that I ended up parting ways with an artist, I had a conversation with an old friend of mine. I'm sure you do too. I have a short list of people that, when things get tough, I can call and get counsel on and just support. And, my friend Ben falls into that category. And we were just talking and catching up and he was like, so, hey, what's going on with your artist? Blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, we're doing this, we're doing that. And he's like, my artist has a tour in January and we're taking submissions for support. Do you think he'd be interested in doing that? And it would, it's a really great matchup. I hope it comes together, but it doesn't matter if it does on some level, because it really reminded me in a moment that I kind of needed it, that this is a lot of the work that we do isn't necessarily about, going from point A to point B. It's about the relationship component and being good to each other and trying to be supportive of each other. And you'd be surprised when somebody picks up on that and wants to reciprocate it. And typically, at least what I found, it's quite honestly, in the story you just shared, it's in ways you would never expect or know,
Right.
or predict.
Right.
And there's something to be said for that, I think that's almost the catalyst to what we do as artist managers, for artists, that goes beyond capacity of the work in and of itself, is like, connecting and planting these seeds and just never knowing what's going to come to fruition, but just doing good by the vision of an artist and doing good to others. Sometimes that stuff collides in a way you just couldn't ever predict.
Right. That's my favorite thing about this job too. I feel like every time I pick up the phone, there's a potential for something really cool to be happening and some big deal, someone to be calling, because we spend all of our time just planting seeds and watering them. And so it's really fun when, you know, somebody calls and some conversation you had 5 years ago triggered something in someone's mind and they thought of you now 5 years later. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the high points. I think once you get a little bit of experience and some connecting points under your wings, it's something that can really, you know, lift you up as you go. That's great advice. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat through all this.
Of course. I love it.
Thanks to our guest Erin today, and thanks to you for allowing us to occupy your ear space for a bit. I'd like to thank my friend Tony Miracle for both the theme music and graphics for Tough Love, and I wanted to dedicate this first season, as we have been so far, to a truly inspirational manager who recently passed away, Elliot Roberts. Rate us, follow us, and above all, share this podcast with all your friends and fellow music industry and artist communities. It takes a village. You can reach us at chris@anhedoniamanagement.com. That's CHRIS@ANHEDONIAMGMT.com. Be well, trip up, get back up, and let's all learn as we go. Until next time.